Carlos Mendez's sledgehammer was supposed to hit rotted wood. Instead, it broke through 40 years of lies and exposed the most disturbing child trafficking conspiracy in American history. The false wall crumbled like it had been waiting decades to give up its secrets. Behind the paneling, wrapped in plastic and preserved like evidence from hell, was a leather-bound diary that would destroy everything the town of Pine Ridge thought it knew about faith, family, and the monsters who hide behind both. Personal Journal, Brother Michael Thompson, Summer 1986. Carlos opened to a random page and immediately wished he'd never been born. July 15, 1986. The 8 are ready. I've spent weeks preparing them spiritually for what's to come. They trust me completely now. They call me their shepherd, and they are my perfect flock. Tonight, we begin the final purification. 8 names were written on the inside cover in careful script. 8 children who'd vanished from Pine Ridge Church Camp during the summer of 1986, sparking the largest manhunt in Montana history. 8 children whose bodies were never found, whose families never got closure, whose disappearance haunted an entire community for nearly 4 decades. Timothy Chun, age 9. Sarah Williams, age 10. Marcus Johnson, age 8. Emma Rodriguez, age 11. David Park, age 9. Lisa Foster, age 8. Michael Torres, age 10. Amy Walsh, age 9. But as Carlos called 911 with shaking hands, he had no idea that Brother Michael Thompson's diary wasn't a confession. It was a cover story. If you're into cinematic true crime stories based on real-life disappearances and cold cases, you're about to discover that sometimes the most innocent places hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear. The diary's final entry was dated July 20th, 1986, the day the children disappeared forever. But the handwriting in that entry didn't belong to Brother Michael Thompson. It belonged to someone the children trusted even more. July 14th, 1986. Location, Pine Ridge Church Camp, Montana. The campfire crackled as 8 children sat in a perfect circle, their faces glowing orange in the mountain darkness. Brother Michael Thompson watched them with satisfaction. Weeks of careful preparation had led to this moment. "Timothy, can you remind everyone what makes our group special?" he asked, his voice carrying across the circle of young faces. 9-year-old Timothy chin shifted uncomfortably. "We're chosen." "That's right. Chosen by God for something extraordinary." Brother Michael leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But tomorrow night, God is going to ask something very difficult of us." Emma Rodriguez, 11 and the group's natural leader, raised her small hand. "What kind of difficult?" "The kind that separates true believers from pretenders." Michael's smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind his eyes. "You trust me, don't you, Emma?" "Yes, Brother Michael." "Then you'll understand that sometimes God's plan seems scary to people who don't have real faith." Sarah Williams, the pastor's own daughter, felt ice forming in her stomach. "Brother Michael, I don't want to do anything scary." "Sweet Sarah, you won't have to do anything at all. You just have to trust the adults who love you." As the children returned to their cabins, none of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line, someone who'd been tracking Brother Michael's activities for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. Brother Michael had no idea that his carefully planned operation was about to become someone else's opportunity. April 12, 2024. Location, Glacier County Sheriff's Office, Montana. Brother Michael Thompson's diary read like a blueprint for child abduction, each entry more disturbing than the last. Detective Lieutenant Rebecca Stone had been staring at the pages for 3 hours, and the words were starting to blur together like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. July 10th, 1986. The final 8 have been selected. Emma Rodriguez will be the key. Once I control her, the others will follow like sheep. July 12th, 1986. Individual counseling sessions are working perfectly, using scripture to normalize the concept of ultimate sacrifice. They're beginning to see death as a pathway to divine glory. July 14th, 1986. Tonight, I tell them about tomorrow. They trust me completely now. They would follow me into hell if I asked. Stone's hands were shaking as she reached for her coffee, the implications hitting her like physical blows. This wasn't just a predator's confession. It was a manual for psychological manipulation. Her phone exploded with a text from the medical examiner. Stop whatever you're doing and get down here now. What we found in that wall changes everything. 20 minutes later, Stone stood in the county morgue staring at evidence that made Brother Michael's diary look like a grocery list. Construction crew found this metal container behind the same wall, Dr. Martinez explained, his voice tight with controlled horror. Waterproof, perfectly preserved. Inside, 8 sets of children's clothing, folded with military precision. 8 small backpacks with name tags. 8 plastic bags containing personal items, a friendship bracelet, a baseball card, a tiny wooden cross. And at the bottom, a videotape labeled July 20th, 1986, The Chosen 8. Doctor, please tell me that tape doesn't show what I think it shows. Dr. Martinez's expression was grim. I've screened it. It's not what you expect. What do you mean? The children are alive and unharmed on July 20th. But detective, he paused, choosing his words carefully. They're not with Brother Michael Thompson. July 20th, 1986. Location, Pine Ridge Church Camp, 11:30 p.m. Brother Michael crept through the darkness toward the girls' cabin, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tonight was the night he'd been planning for months. The night 8 children would finally ascend to divine glory under his guidance. But when he pushed open the door to cabin 7, his flashlight revealed 4 empty beds. No children, no sounds, just the lingering scent of something medicinal in the air. Panic rising in his throat, he sprinted to cabin 12 where the boys should have been sleeping. For more empty beds. For more missing children. Looking for someone, Michael? He spun around, his flashlight beam catching a familiar face that shouldn't have been there at this hour. Pastor Williams? What are you? How did you? Reverend James Williams stepped into the light with a smile that made Michael's blood freeze. In his hand was something metallic that gleamed in the flashlight beam. I found your diary, son. Very detailed planning. Very illuminating. Michael's mouth went dry. Pastor, I can explain. No need. Williams moved closer, and Michael could see it was a tire iron in his hand. You see, Michael, you're not the first young counselor to develop these particular urges around children. I don't understand. Of course you don't. You thought you were serving God, didn't you? Thought you were chosen for something special. Williams' laugh was colder than the Montana night. Poor, deluded boy. You were never the shepherd, Michael. You were always the sheep. Michael backed against the cabin wall. Where are the children? Safe. Serving their true purpose. Williams raised the tire iron. But you, my troubled young friend, are going to take the blame for what happens to them. The last thing Brother Michael Thompson saw was Pastor Williams' peaceful expression as the metal came down, and the horrible realization that he'd been nothing more than a pawn. A scapegoat for something infinitely more monstrous than his own twisted fantasies. April 13th, 2024. Location, Glacier County Sheriff's Office, Conference Room. The videotape from 1986 played on an old CRT monitor as Detective Stone watched her understanding of the case shatter into pieces. The footage was grainy but devastatingly clear, 8 missing children singing hymns in what appeared to be a concrete basement. But it wasn't the children that made Stone's blood run cold. It was the adults leading them in prayer. Freeze it there, Stone commanded, pointing at the screen. That's Reverend James Williams, Sarah's own father. FBI Special Agent Maria Santos leaned forward. The woman beside him? Margaret Foster, camp director, Lisa Foster's mother. Stone felt sick saying it. And the man with the medical bag? Dr. Richard Chun, Timothy's father. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This wasn't a lone predator scenario. This was parents and church leadership. Look at this diary entry from July 18th, D.A. Chun said, his voice shaking. Pastor Williams says the children will transcend physical existence tonight, that their sacrifice will purify our community. I still don't understand the full plan, but I trust his divine wisdom. Stone studied the frozen image on screen, 8 terrified children surrounded by the very adults who should have protected them. Michael Thompson wasn't the mastermind. He was the fall guy, a disturbed counselor who developed an unhealthy obsession with specific children, Agent Santos agreed. Perfect cover story for whatever the real perpetrators were planning. But what were they planning? D.H. demanded. The diary mentions transcendence and purification, but no specifics. Stone pulled out architectural plans recovered from the demolished church. We found more than Thompson's diary in that wall. Underground tunnel systems connecting the church to the camp. financial records showing massive cash donations from out-of-state sources, and correspondence with similar churches across the region. You think this was part of a larger network? I think Pine Ridge Church Camp was one location in a multi-state operation. Stone placed missing persons reports on the table. Agent Santos, show them what you found. Santos opened her laptop, revealing data that made the room temperature seem to drop 10 degrees. Cross-referencing similar disappearances from church camps across the region. Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota. All involving small groups of children. All investigations that went nowhere. Stone felt the horrible scope becoming clear. How many total? 47 confirmed disappearances between 1982 and 1989. All from rural church camps run by the same denomination. Jesus Christ, D.H. whispered. We're not looking at serial murder. We're looking at systematic child trafficking disguised as religious activity. The room fell silent as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about 8 missing children from a church camp in 1986. This was about a multi-generational network of predators who'd spent decades perfecting the art of making children disappear. April 13, 2024. Location: Helena Police Department, interview room. Sarah Williams looked nothing like the smiling 10-year-old from the camp photos. At 48, her hair was prematurely white, her hands shook constantly, and her eyes held the hollow stare of someone who'd seen hell and lived to remember every detail. But the birthmark on her left shoulder was an exact match for the missing person report from 1986. My name is Sarah Williams, she whispered, and I've been waiting 38 years to destroy the people who stole my childhood. Detective Stone activated her recorder. Sarah, where have you been since 1986? Different places, different names. They moved us every few years to avoid detection. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for water. I escaped in 2019 when one of the guards got careless. Took me 5 years to find the courage to come forward. Who is they? The network. Religious leaders, politicians, wealthy donors who believed children could be purified through suffering. Sarah's voice grew stronger. People who thought our pain would bring them closer to God. Agent Santos leaned forward. Were the other 7 children with you? Sarah's composure shattered. Timothy died in 1992. David in 1995. Emma lasted until 2003. She paused, struggling to continue. Marcus, Lisa, Michael, and Amy. They didn't make it past 18. What happened to them? The network had a rule. Children could be kept until adulthood for religious purposes. After that, Sarah's voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Stone felt physically sick. Sarah, we need you to tell us everything about the people involved. My father wasn't acting alone. There was Dr. Chun, Mrs. Foster, and dozens of others across multiple states. Sarah pulled out a worn notebook. I kept records of everything. Names, locations, dates. I knew someday I'd need proof. What about Brother Michael Thompson? Sarah's expression hardened with unexpected fury. Michael was never part of the real conspiracy. He was a sick, vulnerable young man who my father identified as the perfect scapegoat. They encouraged his obsession with us children, then murdered him when it was time to make us disappear. Agent Santos studied Sarah's notebook, seeing entries that spanned decades. This shows operations in 6 states over 20 years. How many children total? Hundreds, maybe more. They called it the harvest, taking children from families they deemed spiritually unworthy. Sarah met Stone's eyes. Detective, most of these people are still alive. Still respected members of their communities. Still hiding behind their churches and their good reputations. Do you have evidence that could convict them? Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital device. Video recordings. Financial documents. Letters describing their operations in graphic detail. She paused, her next words barely audible, and the locations of 17 mass burial sites across 4 states. July 20th, 1986. Location: underground chamber, 2 miles from Pine Ridge Church Camp. 8 children sat in a concrete room lit by a single bare bulb, singing "Jesus Loves Me," as instructed by the adults who'd brought them here. Sarah Williams held Timothy Chen's hand while Emma Rodriguez tried to comfort Lisa Foster, who'd been crying since they arrived. When are we going home? Marcus Johnson asked for the 10th time. Soon, said Dr. Chun. Timothy's father, though Timothy didn't understand why his dad was part of this strange night activity. "We just need to complete your spiritual preparation first." Margaret Foster, the camp director and Lisa's mother, knelt beside the children with a gentle smile that somehow felt wrong. "You're all very special. God has chosen you for a sacred purpose." "What purpose?" Sarah asked. Even at 10, she could sense something was terribly wrong with this situation. It was her father, Pastor Williams, who answered. "You're going to help us build something beautiful, sweetheart. A new kind of family, dedicated entirely to God's will." "But what about our real families?" Pastor Williams' expression darkened for just a moment before the gentle mask returned. "Your real families have failed you, children. They've exposed you to corruption, to worldly influences that poison the soul. We're going to save you from that." 8-year-old David Park raised his hand like he was in school. "Are we going back to camp tomorrow?" "No, David. You're going somewhere much better. Somewhere pure and safe, where you'll never have to worry about the evil world again." As the adults spoke in soothing tones about divine purpose and sacred calling, none of the children noticed the video camera recording everything from a hidden corner of the room. They couldn't know that their terrified faces and confused questions were being preserved as evidence of their willing participation in what was to come. And they certainly couldn't know that Brother Michael Thompson's body was already cooling in a shallow grave 2 miles away, his diary carefully planted in his cabin to support the story that would be told about their disappearance. The last recording of the 8 children shows them being led through a steel door deeper into the underground complex, still singing hymns and trusting the adults who'd spent years earning their faith. The door closed behind them with a sound like a tomb ceiling. April 14, 2024. Location: Pine Ridge Church, Main Sanctuary. Detective Stone stood in the abandoned church sanctuary, studying architectural plans that Sarah Williams had provided. The building looked innocent enough. Wooden pews, stained glass windows, a simple altar where hundreds of families had worshipped for decades. But according to Sarah's testimony, beneath the church lay a network of tunnels and chambers that had housed dozens of kidnapped children over the years. Ground-penetrating radar confirms it, Agent Santos reported, approaching with printouts from the forensic team. Extensive underground construction dating back to the 1970s. Multiple rooms, connecting passages, even what appears to be a crematorium. Stone felt her stomach turn. How did they manage construction this extensive without anyone noticing? Church renovation project. Lasted 3 years, with volunteer labor from congregation members. Anyone asking questions was told they were building enhanced basement facilities for youth programs. And everyone just accepted that? Santos pulled out witness statements they'd collected over the past 2 days. "We've interviewed 47 former congregation members. Most describe Pastor Williams as charismatic and deeply devoted. Anyone who expressed doubts about church activities was gradually excluded from leadership roles. Classic cult manipulation. It gets worse. We found financial records showing the church received over $2 million in anonymous donations between 1980 and 1990, money that was supposedly used for missionary work in developing countries." Stone studied the underground facility blueprints. This wasn't just about Pine Ridge. They were running a sophisticated operation. Sarah Williams provided us with addresses for similar facilities in Idaho, Wyoming, and North Dakota, all connected to churches that received sudden influxes of cash during the same time period. Any of the other perpetrators still alive? Santos consulted her notes. Dr. Richard Chun died in 2019, natural causes. Margaret Foster is in a nursing home in Billings with advanced dementia. But Pastor James Williams is very much alive. Where is he? That's the problem. According to public records, James Williams died in a car accident in 1995. But Sarah insists she saw him as recently as 2018 at one of the network facilities. Stone stared at the church altar where Pastor Williams had delivered sermons about protecting children and preserving innocence. So either Sarah is mistaken, or Williams faked his death to avoid investigation. Her phone buzzed with a text from the FBI lab. DNA results from underground chambers confirm presence of at least 23 different children. Some samples date back to early 1980s. Agent Santos read the message over Stone's shoulder. 23 children in just this one location. And Sarah said there were 17 burial sites across 4 states. The magnitude of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Pine Ridge Church Camp hadn't been an isolated incident involving a disturbed counselor and a few corrupted adults. It had been one node in a network that had systematically kidnapped, abused, and murdered children for decades while hiding behind the facade of religious devotion. Stone's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Lieutenant Stone, we need you at the county hospital immediately. Sarah Williams is asking for you, and she says she remembers where to find Pastor Williams." April 14th, 2024. Location: Glacier County Hospital, room 237. Sarah Williams looked even more fragile under the harsh hospital lighting, connected to monitors that tracked her elevated heart rate and blood pressure. The stress of revealing 38 years of suppressed trauma was taking a physical toll. "Detective, I remembered something," Sarah said as Stone entered the room. "About my father. What did you remember?" Sarah pulled out a photograph from her bedside table, a recent image that looked like it had been taken with a cell phone. This was taken in 2018 at a facility in North Dakota. "Look at the man in the background." Stone studied the photo. An elderly man with white hair and a cane stood partially obscured by shadows, but his profile was clearly visible. "You're sure this is your father?" "I'm positive. He had plastic surgery sometime in the 1990s, changed his appearance, but I'd recognize him anywhere." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "Detective, my father didn't die in 1995. He orchestrated his own disappearance and continued running network operations under a new identity." Agent Santos leaned forward. "Do you know what name he's using now?" "Father Gabriel Morrison. He runs a Catholic retreat center called Sacred Heart Sanctuary in rural North Dakota. Supposedly serves troubled youth and families in crisis." Stone felt ice forming in her veins. "Another front operation. The same pattern as Pine Ridge, just adapted for a different community. He takes in runaway teenagers, children from broken homes, kids no one will miss if they disappear." "How many children are we talking about?" Sarah's expression grew haunted. "When I was there in 2018, I counted at least 30 kids, all living in dormitory-style buildings, all completely isolated from the outside world." Agent Santos was already on her phone, coordinating with FBI field offices in North Dakota. "We need immediate surveillance on Sacred Heart Sanctuary. Possible ongoing child endangerment situation." "There's more," Sarah continued. "The network has been evolving over the years. In the 1980s, they focused on church camps and religious communities. But now they're using social services, foster care systems, even juvenile detention centers to identify targets." Stone pulled out her notebook. "How extensive is this network today?" "I don't know exactly, but when I escaped in 2019, there were active operations in at least 12 states. Hundreds of adults involved, religious leaders, social workers, law enforcement, wealthy donors who fund everything." "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Sarah's hands shook as she reached for water. "Because I knew they'd kill me before I could testify. The network has resources, connections, people in positions of power. They've eliminated witnesses before." "What changed?" "I got cancer in 2022. Doctors gave me 6 months to live." Sarah smiled grimly. "Hard to intimidate someone who's already dying. And I decided those bastards weren't going to outlive me." Stone's radio crackled with an update from Agent Santos. "Lieutenant, we've got eyes on Sacred Heart Sanctuary. Multiple buildings, high security fences, no obvious signs of children, but significant adult activity. Sarah, we need you to tell us everything you know about current network operations. Locations, names, how they move children between facilities." Sarah pulled out her worn notebook again. "I've been tracking them for years, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment." She looked directly at Stone. "Detective, are you prepared for this investigation to destroy everything you thought you knew about how institutions protect children?" "What do you mean?" "I mean the network didn't operate in secret for 40 years by avoiding law enforcement. They operated by controlling it." April 15th, 2024. Location: Sacred Heart Sanctuary, North Dakota, 3 a.m. The FBI tactical team moved through the darkness toward the compound's main buildings, their night vision equipment revealing a facility much larger than aerial photos had suggested. Sacred Heart Sanctuary sprawled across 200 acres of rural North Dakota prairie, with multiple dormitories, administrative buildings, and underground structures that didn't appear on any official blueprints. Agent Santos coordinated the operation from a mobile command center, watching thermal imaging that showed dozens of heat signatures throughout the facility, far more than would be expected for a small retreat center. Team Alpha, what do you see? Multiple buildings with reinforced security. This place is built like a prison, not a retreat center. Any sign of children? Thermal shows concentrated heat signatures in the southern dormitory. Looks like sleeping quarters with 30 to 40 individuals. Santos felt her heart racing. If Sarah Williams was right, they were about to uncover evidence of ongoing child trafficking on a massive scale. Team Beta, status on the main administrative building? Breaching now. Interior shows evidence of recent occupation, but appears currently empty. As the teams moved deeper into the compound, Santos monitored communications from multiple law enforcement agencies coordinating simultaneous raids on network locations across 4 states. If Sarah's intelligence was accurate, they were dismantling a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for decades. Agent Santos, this is Team Alpha. We've found them. Found who? The children. 32 kids aged 12 to 17, all in dormitory-style housing. They appear unharmed, but extremely frightened. Santos closed her eyes in relief. Any sign of Father Gabriel Morrison? Negative. Building appears to have been evacuated recently. But Agent, you need to see what we found in the basement. 20 minutes later, Santos stood in an underground chamber that looked like it belonged in a medieval dungeon rather than a modern religious facility. Stone walls, metal doors, and surveillance equipment monitoring what appeared to be individual cells. How many rooms like this? 12 that we've found so far. All empty now, but there's evidence of recent occupation. Personal belongings, clothing, makeshift bedding. Santos examined the surveillance setup. They were monitoring everything. Recording it. Agent, there's something else. We found this in what appears to be an office. The tactical officer handed her a modern computer tablet. The device contained files that made Santos physically sick, detailed records of children who'd passed through the facility, including photos, personal information, and notes about their spiritual development and purification progress. But it was the email correspondence that revealed the true scope of the network's current operations. 2. Sacred Heart Leadership. From Phoenix Operations. July Harvest. Confirming delivery of 12 subjects from Arizona foster system. Ages 13 to 16, all documented as runaways. Phoenix PD has closed missing person cases. Subjects ready for processing upon arrival. 2. Phoenix Operations. From Sacred Heart Leadership. July Harvest. Excellent work. Recommend immediate transfer to Montana facility for initial conditioning before permanent placement. Network evaluation scheduled for August 15th. Santos scrolled through dozens of similar messages, each one representing children who'd been systematically kidnapped from foster care, juvenile detention, and homeless shelters across multiple states. Her radio crackled with updates from other raid locations. Agent Santos, this is Denver Field Office. We've secured the Colorado facility. Found evidence of at least 50 children processed through here in the past 2 years. Billings office reporting successful entry to the Montana location. Facility appears recently abandoned, but we've found extensive documentation and computer equipment. Helena office has secured the Idaho compound. No children present, but significant evidence of network financial operations. As reports continued coming in, Santos realized they'd succeeded in disrupting active operations, but had missed the leadership. The network had been tipped off and evacuated key personnel before the raids began, which meant someone with access to FBI communications was working for the enemy. April 16, 2024. Location: FBI Field Office, Billings, Montana. The conference room looked like a war room, with maps, photographs, and evidence charts covering every available surface. Representatives from 6 FBI field offices, multiple local law enforcement agencies, and federal prosecutors worked around the clock to process evidence from the simultaneous raids. Detective Stone stood before a timeline that stretched across an entire wall, documenting network activities from 1975 to 2024. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering: hundreds of missing children, dozens of facilities, and involvement from trusted community leaders across multiple states. Status report on the children we recovered? Stone asked. Agent Santos consulted her notes. 32 children from Sacred Heart, 18 from the Colorado facility, and 7 from a previously unknown location in Wyoming. All are receiving medical attention and trauma counseling. Any leads on Father Gabriel Morrison or other network leadership? That's where it gets complicated. Santos pulled out surveillance photos from the raids. The facilities were professionally cleaned before we arrived. Computer hard drives wiped, paper records destroyed, even DNA evidence carefully removed. They were warned. Definitely. But we did find one piece of evidence they missed. Santos placed a cell phone on the table. Encrypted device hidden in Sacred Heart's administrative building. Our tech team cracked it this morning. Stone examined the phone. What did they find? Text messages between network leadership coordinating the evacuation. But more importantly, communications with someone using the codename Shepard, who provided details about our investigation timeline. Inside information. Shepard knew about our raid plans 12 hours before we moved. Knew which facilities we'd identified, which evidence we'd recovered, even which witnesses we'd interviewed. The implications were chilling. Someone with high-level access to the investigation was feeding information to the very criminals they were trying to catch. Stone's phone buzzed with a call from the county hospital. Detective Stone, you need to get here immediately. Sarah Williams says she knows who Shepard is, but she's refusing to talk to anyone except you. 30 minutes later, Stone sat beside Sarah's hospital bed as monitors showed increasingly erratic vital signs. The stress of the investigation combined with her terminal illness was taking a devastating toll. Sarah, Agent Santos told me you have information about someone called Shepard. Sarah's eyes were bright with fever, but her voice remained clear. I've been thinking about who could have warned my father about the raids. Someone with access to FBI communications, someone the network trusted completely. Do you know who it is? I think so. But detective, you're not going to like what I have to tell you. Stone leaned closer. Sarah, if you know something that could help us catch these people, it's someone on your investigation team. Someone who's been feeding information to the network from the beginning. That's impossible. Everyone involved has been thoroughly vetted. Sarah pulled out her notebook one more time, flipping to a page filled with careful observations. When I escaped in 2019, I spent months documenting everything I could remember about network operations. Names, faces, conversations I'd overheard during my captivity. What did you find? I remembered someone, a law enforcement officer who visited Sacred Heart in 2018. Someone my father called our guardian angel in Montana. Stone felt her blood run cold. Who was it, Sarah? Sarah looked directly at her with dying eyes. Detective, the person feeding information to the network is your FBI liaison. Agent Maria Santos has been working for them all along. April 16, 2024. Location, FBI Field Office, Billings, Montana, 6:30 p.m. Stone returned to the FBI field office with murder in her heart and Agent Santos' betrayal burning like acid in her veins. If Sarah Williams was right, Santos had been sabotaging the investigation from day one, warning the network, helping leaders escape, potentially putting every recovered child back in danger. She found Santos alone in the conference room, working late, as always. The devoted agent act was perfect, right down to the tired eyes and scattered evidence files. Maria, burning the midnight oil again. Santos looked up with what appeared to be genuine exhaustion, trying to make sense of this network organizational chart. The connections are incredibly complex. Stone sat down across from her, studying Santos' face for cracks in the performance. Any progress tracking down Morrison and the other leaders? Some leads on properties connected to shell companies, but they're all abandoned now. It's like they evaporated. Almost like they had advance warning. Santos nodded, maintaining perfect eye contact. Their operational security was clearly sophisticated. They had contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Stone watched Santos carefully as she delivered her trap. Maria, Sarah Williams wants to meet with you privately tonight. She says she has more information about network operations, but she'll only share it with you. For exactly half a second, something flickered across Santos' face. Not fear, something worse. Relief. Then the mask snapped back into place. Of course. When and where? County Hospital. Room 237. She specifically requested no other agents present. Santos stood, gathering her files with practiced casualness. I'll head over there now. We need every piece of intelligence she can provide. As Santos left, Stone counted to 30 before following. If Sarah was right, Santos would contact her network handlers before visiting the hospital, either to report what Sarah might reveal or to arrange for the dying woman's permanent silence. Stone tailed Santos through Billings' darkened streets, staying back, but close enough to track her movements. Instead of heading toward the hospital, Santos drove to an industrial district on the city's outskirts. She parked behind an abandoned warehouse and made a phone call that lasted exactly 4 minutes. When Santos finally drove to the hospital, Stone knew with absolute certainty that Sarah Williams was walking into a death trap. April 16, 2024. Location: Glacier County Hospital, Room 237, 9:15 p.m. Sarah Williams looked like death itself, but her eyes burned with the fury of someone who'd survived hell to expose the monsters who'd put her there. When Agent Santos entered the room alone, Sarah's expression shifted to something predatory. "Ms. Williams, Detective Stone said you had additional information?" Sarah studied Santos with the calculating stare of a hunter who'd finally cornered her prey. "I do. But first, I need to ask you something, Agent Santos." "Of course. When you visited Sacred Heart Sanctuary in 2018, what did my father promise you in exchange for your protection?" Santos froze like a deer in headlights. For one revealing moment, her careful FBI facade cracked completely, revealing something cold and absolutely soulless underneath. "I'm not sure what you mean, Ms. Williams. I was there, Agent Santos, hiding in the chapel when you met with Father Morrison. I heard every fucking word." Santos' hand drifted toward her service weapon. "Sarah, your illness is affecting your memory. I've never been to Sacred Heart before this investigation. You told my father that local law enforcement was getting too close to the Pine Ridge truth. You warned him to relocate operations and eliminate potential witnesses." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. "You've been the network's guardian angel for years." The hospital room door burst open as Detective Stone entered with her weapon drawn and murder in her eyes. "Agent Santos, hands where I can see them. Right fucking now." Santos actually laughed, a sound so cold it could have frozen the Montana air outside. "Detective Stone, I was wondering when you'd finally piece it together. How long have you been working for them?" "Since before you knew there was a them to work for." Santos raised her hands with mocking compliance. "The network has had assets in federal law enforcement for decades. How else do you think we stayed invisible for 40 years? We?" Santos smiled with genuine pleasure. "I've been part of the network since college, detective. Recruited by a psychology professor who recognized my potential for the cause." Stone kept her weapon trained on Santos. "You helped them murder children. I helped them save children from a corrupt, godless world. Just like Father Morrison saved Sarah and the others from their spiritually bankrupt families." Sarah struggled to sit up in her hospital bed, her voice shaking with rage. "You're completely insane. You helped them torture and kill innocent kids. We provided spiritual purification for children who would have otherwise been lost to sin and worldly influences." Santos' voice took on the rehearsed cadence of someone reciting doctrine. "Every child we processed was given the opportunity to serve a higher divine purpose." Stone felt physically sick. "By serve a higher purpose, you mean die. Physical death is temporary, detective. Spiritual salvation is eternal. Where are Morrison and the other leaders now?" Santos' smile widened with obvious satisfaction. "Somewhere you'll never find them. The network has been preparing for exposure like this for decades. We have safe houses, new identities, resources you can't imagine. What about the children we recovered? Are they safe?" For the first time, Santos looked genuinely pleased with herself. "Oh, detective, you still don't understand how deep this goes, do you?" Stone felt ice forming in her stomach. "What the hell do you mean?" "The children you rescued are being processed through social services systems we've controlled for years. Foster families who work for us, group homes we operate, therapeutic facilities under network management." Santos laughed like she'd just delivered the perfect punchline. "Within 6 months, every one of those children will be back in network custody, and there won't be a paper trail in existence to follow." "That's impossible." "Is it? How do you think we operated for 40 years without detection? We didn't avoid the system, detective. We became the system." Sarah Williams reached for the call button beside her bed, but Santos was faster. In one fluid motion, the agent drew her weapon and fired twice. Sarah slumped back against her pillows, blood spreading across her hospital gown like spilled paint. But even as she died, her eyes remained fixed on Stone with desperate intensity. Stone fired 3 shots center mass, dropping Santos to the hospital floor. But as she knelt beside Sarah's body, she saw the dying woman had been trying to give her something. In Sarah's clenched fist was a piece of paper with an address written in shaky handwriting. 1247, Pine Ridge Road. Emergency cache. Evidence to destroy them all. Sarah Williams had used her final breath to hand Stone the weapon that could bring down the entire network. Now Stone just had to live long enough to use it. April 17, 2024. Location, 1247, Pine Ridge Road, Montana Wilderness. The cabin sat in 40 miles of absolute nowhere, accessible only by a dirt road that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the Carter administration. Sarah's final message had led Stone to what appeared to be a forgotten hunting lodge, but the dying woman's note suggested it contained evidence that could obliterate the network completely. Stone approached with her weapon drawn, knowing Santos might have warned other operatives about this location before her death. The building looked abandoned, but she'd learned not to trust appearances when dealing with an organization this sophisticated. Inside, she found Sarah Williams' life's work, a war room that would have impressed military intelligence. Photographs of missing children organized by state and decade. Financial records showing money transfers between churches and shell companies. Audio recordings of network meetings where participants discussed operational details without bothering to disguise their identities. And in the center of it all, a massive organizational chart showing network leadership across the entire United States. Dozens of names Stone recognized as judges, prosecutors, social workers, and law enforcement officers. But it was Sarah's most recent intelligence that made Stone's blood freeze solid. Current surveillance photos of the children rescued from network facilities, now placed in foster homes and group facilities, all showing signs of continued abuse and systematic conditioning. Sarah had been right. The network didn't just control criminal operations, they owned the very systems designed to protect children. Stone's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Detective Stone, we need your immediate location. Agent Santos' body has disappeared from the hospital. What the fuck do you mean disappeared? Hospital security footage shows 2 individuals in medical uniforms removing her body approximately 1 hour after the shooting. They had federal coroner credentials that looked completely legitimate. Stone felt the world tilting on its axis. Even in death, Santos was being extracted by network operatives with access to official government resources. Detective, there's more. We've intercepted communications suggesting the network is implementing final containment protocols. Meaning what? They're moving to eliminate all remaining witnesses and physical evidence. Our intelligence suggests you have maybe hours before they locate your position. Stone looked around Sarah's archive, realizing she was standing in the most dangerous room in America. A repository of evidence that could destroy the network completely, if she could get it to authorities who weren't compromised. But first, she had to survive what was coming. Because according to Sarah's organizational chart, the network had law enforcement assets throughout Montana, and they all had one priority now: making sure Detective Rebecca Stone never left Pine Ridge Road alive. April 17, 2024. Location, 1247, Pine Ridge Road, 11:30 p.m. Stone barricaded herself inside the cabin as vehicle lights appeared on the dirt road leading to Sarah's hideout. 3 sets of headlights, moving slowly and deliberately. The approach of professionals who knew their target was cornered. She'd already photographed the most critical evidence from Sarah's archive and transmitted it to FBI contacts she hoped weren't compromised. But if the network was moving to eliminate all witnesses, those contacts might not live long enough to act on the information. The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, and Stone could hear multiple doors slamming. At least 6 people, based on the sound patterns, all moving with military precision. Her radio had gone silent an hour ago, either jammed by network technology or abandoned by backup units that had been called off by network operatives within law enforcement. A voice called out from the darkness. Detective Stone, this is Sheriff Marcus Thompson from Glacier County. We know you're inside, and we're here to help. Stone almost laughed. Sheriff Thompson's name was prominently featured on Sarah's organizational chart as a network operative since the 1990s. "We've received reports that you're in danger from network operatives," Thompson continued. "We're here to escort you to safety." Through the cabin's single window, Stone could see figures positioning themselves around the building. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't a rescue operation. "Detective, we know about Agent Santos' betrayal. We're here to make sure you get justice for what happened to those children." The manipulation was subtle but obvious to someone who understood the network's methods. They were positioning themselves as the legitimate authorities while painting Stone as an unstable officer who'd killed a federal agent. By morning, the official story would be that Detective Rebecca Stone had suffered a psychological breakdown, murdered Agent Santos, and died in a tragic confrontation with law enforcement while trying to destroy evidence. The network's final cover-up would bury the truth forever. Stone made her decision. Rather than wait for them to breach the cabin, she would force a confrontation on her terms. She opened the cabin door and stepped into the Montana darkness with her hands visible but her weapon ready. "Sheriff Thompson, I'm unarmed and coming out. But before we go anywhere, I need you to explain why your name appears on network organizational charts as a 30-year operative." The silence that followed told Stone everything she needed to know. Then the shooting started. April 18th, 2024. Location: FBI headquarters, Quantico, Virginia. Director Patricia Walsh sat in her secure conference room at 6 a.m., reviewing overnight reports from Montana that read like a war zone casualty list rather than a law enforcement operation. Detective Rebecca Stone, critical condition, multiple gunshot wounds, currently in induced coma at Billings Regional Medical Center. Sheriff Marcus Thompson, dead from single gunshot wound to the chest. 5 unidentified individuals, dead at scene, all carrying false law enforcement credentials. Agent Maria Santos, body still missing, believed to have been retrieved by network operatives. Sarah Williams, died from gunshot wounds at Glacier County Hospital. The network's final gambit had failed, but at tremendous cost. Stone had managed to eliminate several operatives and transmit crucial evidence before being critically wounded, but the organization's leadership remained at large. Director Walsh turned to the evidence Stone had transmitted, photographs of Sarah Williams' comprehensive archive documenting 4 decades of network operations. The scope was staggering. Over 400 missing children. Operations in 12 states. Infiltration of law enforcement, social services, and judicial systems at every level. But it was the current operations data that demanded immediate action. Status report on the children we recovered from network facilities? Walsh asked her deputy director. "That's our biggest problem, Director." According to Stone's evidence, 37 of the 43 children we placed in protective custody have been transferred to facilities controlled by network operatives. How is that possible? The network has spent decades infiltrating child protective services. They control placement decisions, therapeutic facilities, even some foster families. We thought we were rescuing those kids, but we were actually delivering them back to their captors. Walsh studied photographs of children who'd been rescued, only to find themselves in continued captivity. The network's final contingency hadn't been to destroy evidence. It had been to reclaim their victims through legitimate government channels. What about network leadership? Father Gabriel Morrison and at least 12 other key figures remain at large. Financial intercepts suggest they've activated international escape protocols, meaning they're likely out of the country by now, probably in nations without extradition treaties. And they've taken their most valuable assets with them. Walsh didn't need to ask what valuable assets meant. The network's leadership had fled with children they could continue to exploit in jurisdictions where American law enforcement couldn't reach them. Her secure phone rang with a call from the hospital in Billings. "Director Walsh, this is Dr. Martinez. Detective Stone is awake and asking to speak with you immediately. She says she has information about network operations that wasn't in her transmitted reports." 20 minutes later, Walsh was on a secure video call with Stone, who looked barely alive but remained lucid enough to deliver intelligence that changed everything. Director Sarah Williams didn't just document past network operations. She identified their succession plan. What succession plan? The network has been training a new generation of operatives for decades. Children who were kidnapped as kids, raised within the organization, and programmed to continue their work as adults. Stone paused to catch her breath. They're called legacy assets, and they're embedded throughout law enforcement, and social services nationwide. Walsh felt her blood run cold. How many legacy assets are we talking about? Sarah's records show at least 200 individuals who were kidnapped as children in the 1980s and 1990s, raised by the network, and placed in positions of authority as adults. They don't even know they were victims. They believe they were saved by the organization and owe it their loyalty. So even if we arrest the current leadership, the network continues operating through legacy assets who have no idea they're perpetuating the same crimes that were committed against them. Stone's voice grew weaker. Director, we haven't dismantled a criminal organization. We've uncovered a self-perpetuating system that's designed to survive indefinitely. The implications were staggering. The network hadn't just evaded law enforcement. It had created a new generation of operatives who would continue their work for decades, all while believing they were serving a righteous cause. Walsh realized they weren't investigating a criminal conspiracy that could be solved with arrests and prosecutions. They were fighting a generational cycle of abuse that had infected the very institutions designed to protect children. April 20th, 2024. Location: Portland, Oregon, Tommy Brennan's home. Chin stood on the front porch of a modest two-story house, watching through the window as Tommy Brennan helped his daughters with homework at the kitchen table. She'd flown across the country to deliver this news in person, knowing that a phone call wouldn't be enough. Tommy opened the door with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "Detective Chin, what are you doing here?" "Mr. Brennan, I need to speak with you privately. It's about the investigation." Tommy's wife, Carol, appeared behind him with concern written across her face. "Is everything okay? Carol, why don't you take the girls upstairs for a bit?" Tommy said quietly. "Detective Chun and I need to talk." When they were alone in the living room, Chin pulled out her tablet and showed Tommy the photos from Frank Morrison's property excavations. "We found more children, Tommy. A lot more." Tommy stared at the images in silence, his face growing pale. "How many?" 16 confirmed victims between 1984 and 1988. Your 7 friends from the party were the last ones. Jesus Christ. Tommy sank into his chair. 16 children. Chin showed him Frank Morrison's confession letter. "Tommy, I need you to read this. It's going to be difficult, but you need to understand what really happened." As Tommy read, Chin watched his expression change from shock to horror to something darker. "Frank Morrison was part of it," he said finally. "The detective who investigated my friend's disappearance was helping the people who killed them. It appears so." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Detective Chun, there's something I never told anyone. Not my parents, not my therapist, not my wife." "What is it?" "The night before my birthday party, Detective Morrison came to our house. He said he wanted to ask me some questions about my friends, who was coming to the party, what kinds of games we liked to play, whether any of my friends were having problems at home." Chin felt ice forming in her stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Everything. I was 8 years old, and a police detective was asking me questions. I told him Sarah was afraid of dogs. Kevin collected baseball cards. Amy wanted to be a teacher. I told him which kids had mean parents and which ones were happy." Tommy's voice broke. "I gave him a shopping list of victims." "Tommy, you were a child. You couldn't have known." "But I did know." Tommy stood up and began pacing. "Even at 8, I knew something was wrong about that conversation. Morrison asked too many personal questions, took too many notes. But I told myself he was just being thorough." Chin thought about Harold Vance's journal, filled with detailed information about local children and their families. "Tommy, this wasn't your fault. Morrison was a trained investigator who manipulated you into providing information. Was I the only one?" Chin hesitated, then showed him Amanda Foster's diary entries. "We found evidence that Morrison interviewed several children in the months before each abduction. He was systematically gathering intelligence." Tommy read Amanda's notebook with shaking hands. "Look at this entry from February 1988. She wrote that Harold seemed excited about getting information from Uncle Frank's little helper. That was me. I was the little helper who provided targeting information for my friend's murders." "Tommy, no, detective. Don't try to make me feel better about this. 16 children are dead, and I helped kill them." Tommy walked to the window and stared out at his daughter's bicycles on the front lawn. "How do I tell Carol about this? How do I explain to my girls that their father is responsible for the deaths of 16 children?" Chin stood up and placed a hand on his shoulder. You tell them the truth, that you were manipulated by adults who exploited your trust, that you've spent your entire life trying to make sense of something that was senseless. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's all any of us can do. Tell the truth and hope it's enough. April 25th, 2024. Location: CNN Studios, Atlanta. Live interview. Stone sat across from news anchor Anderson Cooper via satellite link from her hospital bed, the studio lights harsh against her pale complexion. This was her first national television interview about the network case, and she could feel the weight of hundreds of families watching. Detective Stone, let's start with the basics, Cooper said. How did a conspiracy involving religious leaders, social workers, and law enforcement result in the deaths of over 400 children across 4 decades? It started with people who used positions of trust to identify and access vulnerable children, Stone said, her voice still weak from her injuries. They exploited religious institutions, social services, and even law enforcement agencies to create a systematic trafficking operation. But how could something this extensive operate for so long without detection? Stone had been dreading this question. The network didn't avoid the system, Mr. Cooper. They infiltrated it. They placed operatives in key positions throughout child protective services, law enforcement, and the judicial system. When investigations got too close to the truth, they were misdirected or shut down from within. And the families had no idea? These were carefully planned crimes carried out by people the community trusted completely. Religious leaders, teachers, social workers, police officers, the very people parents rely on to protect their children. Cooper leaned forward. Detective, there's been criticism that law enforcement should have uncovered this conspiracy years ago. How do you respond to that? You're right that there were warning signs that should have been recognized, Stone admitted. Pattern recognition, primarily. Too many children disappearing from locations connected to the same institutions. But the network was sophisticated in their methods of concealment and misdirection. What happens now? Are children still at risk? Stone chose her words carefully. We've disrupted network operations in the United States, but similar organizations may be operating internationally. We're working with agencies worldwide to identify and dismantle trafficking networks. What would you say to families who are just now learning that their children's disappearances were part of this larger conspiracy? Stone looked directly into the camera. That your children have been found, and they're finally coming home. That the people who hurt them can never hurt anyone else. And that we're going to keep investigating until we understand the full scope of what happened and prevent it from happening again. As the interview ended, Stone felt a mixture of relief and dread. The story was now public, which meant justice for the victims, but also meant that other secrets might emerge. Her phone buzzed with a text from Director Walsh. International Task Force has identified similar operations in 15 countries. This story is far from over. May 1st, 2024. Location: White House Situation Room, Washington, D.C. President Rebecca Chun sat at the head of the conference table, reviewing briefing materials that made her question everything she thought she knew about child protection in America. Around the table sat the Attorney General, FBI Director, CIA Director, Secretary of Defense, and National Security Advisor. Director Walsh, summarize what we're dealing with. Madam President, we've uncovered evidence of an international criminal organization that has trafficked over 400 American children to facilities worldwide over 4 decades. Intelligence suggests at least 200 of these children remain captive in foreign countries that will not cooperate with extradition requests. And our options for recovering these children? CIA Director James Morrison consulted his briefing materials. The children are held at heavily secured facilities in Romania, Thailand, Germany, and Colombia. All operate under the protection of corrupt government officials who profit from the trafficking operations. What about diplomatic pressure? The Secretary of State shook her head. The governments involved either deny knowledge of the facilities or claim they're legitimate charitable organizations. Without their cooperation, we have no legal mechanism for accessing American citizens held on foreign soil. What about military options? Secretary of Defense Patricia Santos reviewed tactical assessments. We could mount rescue operations, but they would constitute acts of war against sovereign nations. The international consequences would be severe. And if we do nothing? FBI Director Walsh answered quietly. 200 American children remain in captivity indefinitely, and the international trafficking network continues operating with impunity. The room fell silent as the president processed the impossible choice between abandoning American children and starting international conflicts with multiple nations. There's another option, Director Walsh continued. Based on intelligence from our investigation, we could coordinate with legitimate law enforcement agencies in targeted countries to conduct joint operations against specific facilities. What kind of success rate are we looking at? Unknown. But our investigation provided detailed facility layouts and operational intelligence that could make rescue operations feasible. President Chun turned to the CIA director. What's your assessment of international network operations? Extensive and well-funded, but critically dependent on corruption within foreign governments. If we can identify and eliminate their protective relationships, the facilities become vulnerable to legitimate law enforcement action. How do we eliminate those protective relationships? Economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and targeted sanctions against officials who profit from trafficking operations. Make their protection of the network more costly than cooperation with American rescue efforts. The president studied the faces around the table, career professionals who devoted their lives to protecting American citizens but had never faced a threat this complex and far-reaching. I want a comprehensive plan within 72 hours. Diplomatic options, economic pressure, and contingency plans for military rescue operations if other methods fail. She paused, looking at photographs of missing American children. Those kids have been waiting decades for someone to bring them home. We're not going to abandon them now. May 10, 2024. Location: Pine Ridge Memorial Park, Children's Memorial. The memorial had been expanded since Stone's last visit, now featuring 38 granite stones representing all the network victims whose remains had been recovered. Families from across the region gathered for a dedication ceremony that acknowledged decades of loss while celebrating the children who'd finally come home. Stone attended in a wheelchair, still recovering from her injuries but determined to honor the victims whose deaths had exposed the network's crimes. She watched as parents placed flowers on stones bearing their children's names, some of them now grandparents who'd waited 40 years for closure. Timothy Chin's elderly mother approached Stone after the ceremony. "Detective, I wanted to thank you personally. Timothy was 9 when they took him. I'm 78 now, and I never thought I'd live to see him buried properly. Mrs. Chun, your son's death wasn't in vain. The evidence we found has led to rescue operations worldwide. How many children have you saved?" Stone thought about the international rescue operations, the disrupted trafficking networks, and the legacy assets who were slowly being identified and deprogrammed. Hundreds so far, but there are still more out there. Mrs. Chin studied the memorial stones, each representing a life cut short by adults who'd weaponized faith against innocence. "Will you keep looking for them?" "As long as I'm able, ma'am. Every child deserves to come home." As the ceremony concluded, Stone received a secure text message from Director Walsh. International intelligence suggests network leadership is planning major retaliatory operation against law enforcement targets. Recommend immediate transition to witness protection protocols. Stone looked around at the families saying goodbye to children who'd been dead for decades, at the law enforcement officers who'd devoted years to bringing those children home, at the community that had lived with the horror of unanswered questions for nearly 40 years. The network had taken 8 children from Pine Ridge Church Camp in 1986, believing they could make them disappear forever. Instead, those children's deaths had exposed a global trafficking enterprise and led to the rescue of hundreds of victims worldwide. Stone typed her response to Director Walsh. "Understood. But I'm not hiding. If the network wants to come after me, let them come. I have unfinished business with these bastards." She wheeled her chair to the center of the memorial, where a bronze plaque bore the inscription, "In memory of the children who trusted the wrong adults. May their voices guide us toward a safer world." The fight against the network was far from over. International operations continued in countries beyond American jurisdiction. Legacy assets remained embedded in law enforcement and social services. New trafficking methods were being developed to replace disrupted operations. But for the first time in 40 years, the children's voices were being heard. And Detective Rebecca Stone would make sure they were never silenced again. 2 years later, the International Network Task Force had rescued over 300 American children from facilities worldwide and identified trafficking operations in 23 countries. Detective Rebecca Stone, despite permanent disabilities from her injuries, led the task force's domestic operations and became the world's leading expert on network deprogramming techniques. Brother Michael Thompson's diary, found in the walls of Pine Ridge Church Camp, had been translated into 12 languages and became required reading for law enforcement agencies investigating organized child trafficking. The 8 children who disappeared from church camp in 1986 were finally at rest. But their legacy lived on in every child rescued from the darkness, every network operative identified and arrested, and every family reunited after decades of separation. At Pine Ridge Memorial Park, visitors still leave flowers at the children's memorial stones. But now there's something else. A bronze plaque at the memorial center that reads, "They were taken in silence, but they will be remembered with voices that never stop fighting for justice." The network had spent 40 years perfecting the art of making children disappear. But 8 children from a Montana church camp had taught the world that no one disappears forever when someone refuses to stop looking.